The silence was the first thing he noticed. It was a hollow, echoing thing that filled the spaces where furniture used to be. Elias stood in the center of the living room, his work boots leaving faint, dusty outlines on the bare hardwood floor. The mansion, as his wife Monique had always called it, was no longer his. She had taken everything: the art, the Italian leather sofas, the custom-built dining table that had seated 20. She had taken the life he had helped build, piece by painstaking piece. He was left with 3 cardboard boxes and the clothes on his back, and one other thing. Monique, in a final act of dismissive charity, had gestured to a small, velvet-lined box on the marble mantelpiece. "You can have that," she'd said, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that felt sharper than any insult. "That broken old thing your father left you? It's worthless, but I know how you sentimental types are." Now, in his new apartment, a 2-bedroom walk-up that was smaller than their former master closet, the box sat on the windowsill. The city lights of Philadelphia painted shifting patterns on the wall, but inside the air was still and heavy with the ghosts of a concluded life. He ran a calloused thumb over the worn velvet. The watch inside wasn't just broken. It was a relic of a past he could barely touch anymore. His father, a man of few words and even fewer possessions, had given it to him on his 18th birthday. "Time is the only thing you truly own, son," he'd said, his voice rough. "Don't ever let anyone else spend it for you." Elias had failed that lesson spectacularly. He had poured a decade of his time, his ambition, his very soul into Monique's dream, only to be told his time was up. He opened the box. The watch lay on the faded satin, its crystal face cracked, its hands frozen at 3:17. It was heavy, made of a dull, platinum-colored metal that didn't shine. It looked, as Monique had so aptly put it, worthless. He picked it up. The weight of it was familiar, a solid, grounding presence in his palm. He held it to his ear. Silence. No gentle tick-tock, no heartbeat, just a dead, quiet piece of metal. A perfect metaphor for his life. He closed his eyes, the sting of failure, a familiar burn behind them. He had nothing left. Just this broken watch and a little girl sleeping in the next room who deserved a universe he could no longer provide. He sank onto the floor, the watch clutched in his hand, the silence of the empty room pressing in on him. And from that moment, in the quiet darkness of his new and diminished life, everything was about to change. He just didn't know it yet. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm defined by modesty and love. Elias's world had shrunk, but in doing so, it had become richer in the ways that mattered. His days began not with the sterile chime of a smart home system, but with the soft padding of small feet on the floorboards. "Daddy, is the sun awake yet?" Amara stood in the doorway of his room, a small silhouette against the hallway light. Her natural hair was in beautiful coils that bounced with every small movement, a universe of tiny springs full of life. In her arms, she clutched a well-loved stuffed elephant named Peanut. Elias smiled, the weariness in his bones receding at the sight of her. "Almost, sweet pea. The sun is stretching." He was a tall black man, built with the quiet strength of someone who worked with his hands. His own hair was kept short and neat, a deliberate act of self-respect in a life that had been stripped of its external markers of success. He rose from the bed and lifted his daughter into his arms. She smelled of sleep and sweet soap. This was his mansion now, this small, warm weight in his arms. Their apartment was cramped but clean. Amara's drawings, vibrant explosions of color featuring smiling suns, lopsided houses, and a recurring motif of blue butterflies, were taped to every available surface, a gallery of pure joy. In the kitchen, Elias moved with an economy of motion honed by years of practice. He made pancakes, one of which he always managed to burn slightly, a flaw that Amara found hilarious. "You made a crunchy one for Peanut, Daddy," she would giggle, feeding the burnt offering to her elephant. This was their life. Simple meals, walks to the park, bedtime stories where he would do all the voices. Elias had taken a job at a small, dusty shop in a historically black neighborhood of the city, a place that smelled of cleaning oil and old brass. It was called the Horologist's Corner, a name far grander than the reality. He repaired watches. It was a skill his father had taught him, a patient, meditative craft that felt like an anchor in the storm of his new reality. He sat at a small wooden bench, surrounded by tiny gears and delicate instruments, bringing time back to life for other people. His customers were mostly older folks from the neighborhood, bringing in heirlooms and cherished possessions. They didn't know or care about his past life in a glass house in the suburbs. They just knew him as Elias, the quiet man with the gentle, dark hands that could coax a stopped heart back into a steady rhythm. He was good at it, more than good. He could feel the soul of a timepiece, understand its intricate language of springs and levers. He treated each one with a reverence that bordered on spiritual. In the corner of his workbench, next to a jar of tiny screwdrivers, sat his father's watch. He hadn't tried to fix it yet. It felt too final, too much like closing a door he wasn't ready to shut. It was a monument to his father's memory and a symbol of his own brokenness. Sometimes, during a quiet moment in the shop, he would pick it up, feeling its dense, silent weight, and remember his father's words. He hadn't owned his time. But now, every tick of every clock he repaired was a small act of reclamation. He was building a new life second by second. One evening, after tucking Amara into bed, her braids with their colorful beads spread out on the pillow, he sat at the kitchen table. He was sketching a new design for a watch escapement, a purely theoretical exercise that kept his mind sharp. He was content. Not happy, not yet, but content. The deep, quiet satisfaction of a man who knew his own worth, even if the world had forgotten it. He was a father. He was a craftsman. And for now, that was enough. Miles away, in a penthouse that scraped the clouds, Naima stood before a wall of glass, the city lights, a glittering carpet at her feet. She was everything Monique had aspired to be, and everything Elias had run from. Naima was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, a titan of industry whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. She was a powerhouse, a visionary, a black woman who had shattered every ceiling placed above her. Her appearance was a study in controlled elegance. Her deep brown skin was luminous, seeming to absorb the light and radiate it back. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, not a single coil out of place. She wore a tailored suit of pearl gray silk that probably cost more than Elias's rent for a year. But if you looked closely, past the flawless exterior, you could see the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. You could see the loneliness in the way she held herself, as if bracing for a blow. Her world was one of sterile perfection. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, and art chosen by a consultant for its investment potential. There were no crayon drawings on her walls. There were no burnt pancakes in her state-of-the-art kitchen. There was only silence, a cold, oppressive silence that was the polar opposite of the hollow quiet in Elias's empty apartment. His was the silence of loss. Hers was the silence of absence. Naima's life was a series of scheduled victories, board meetings, acquisitions, keynote speeches. She had a team of people to manage every aspect of her existence, from her portfolio to her diet. Yet she felt a profound sense of being out of sync, as if the rhythm of her own life was off by a fraction of a second. This feeling was made tangible by the watch on her wrist. It was a Patek Philippe, a masterpiece of engineering and a symbol of her status. And for the third time in a month, it had stopped. She had been raised to believe that value was measured in achievement. Her parents, both successful academics, had loved her through a lens of expectation. Good grades earned affection. Scholarships earned pride. A CEO position earned their respect. She had never been loved simply for being Naima. As a result, she had built walls around her heart so high and so thick that she wasn't even sure how to find the gate anymore. Her personal life was a wasteland. A failed engagement to a man who had seen her as a merger, not a partner, had been the last time she'd even tried. Now her only companion was the relentless ticking clock of her career, and now even that was broken. She unclasped the watch and held it in her palm. It was beautiful, intricate, and cold. It was supposed to be perfect, a testament to the highest levels of craftsmanship, but it was flawed, just like the life she had so carefully constructed. She had taken it to the most exclusive jeweler in the city, a man who catered to billionaires and royalty. He had shrugged, baffled. "It needs a specialist," he'd said, "someone who understands the soul of the machine." Her executive assistant, a sharp young woman named Chloe, had been tasked with finding such a person. Naima expected a name in Geneva or London. Instead, Chloe had returned with a slip of paper bearing a curious address. "It's a small, old-school place in the Banneker Heights neighborhood," Chloe had explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "The horologist's corner, the online reviews are, well, they're glowing. They say the man who runs it is some kind of artist, a genius with movements." Naima looked at the address. It was in a part of town her driver usually avoided, a place of brick row houses and community gardens, not skyscrapers and valet parking. It seemed absurd, but the best jewelers in the world had failed her. Perhaps it was time to try something different. Perhaps it was time to seek out a little imperfection. She placed the dead, beautiful watch in its case. Tomorrow she would go to the horologist's corner. She would find this supposed genius and see if he could fix what was broken. She had no idea she was about to find someone who could fix so much more. The bell above the door of the horologist's corner gave a gentle, tinny jingle as Naima stepped inside. The immediate shift in atmosphere was jarring. Outside, the city hummed with impatient energy. Inside, time seemed to slow down. The air smelled of wood polish, old paper, and a faint, clean scent of mineral oil. The walls were lined with clocks of every shape and size. Grandfather clocks standing like silent sentinels, cuckoo clocks with their little doors shut, and dozens of smaller mantel and wall clocks, their pendulums swinging in a chorus of soft, asynchronous ticks. Behind a worn wooden counter sat a man, Elias. He didn't look up immediately. He was bent over a workbench, a loop fixed to his eye, his concentration absolute. He was working on the guts of a small pocket watch, his dark, steady hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He wore a simple cotton shirt and a leather apron. He was, Naima noted, the antithesis of the slick, suited men she was used to dealing with. There was no performance here, just quiet, focused competence. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were calm and intelligent. They registered her expensive suit, her poised demeanor, and held no trace of intimidation or fawning. He simply saw a person who had walked into his shop. "Can I help you?" His voice was a low, pleasant baritone. Naima felt an uncharacteristic flicker of awkwardness. She was used to commanding rooms, to having people snap to attention. Here, she was just a customer. She placed the leather case on the counter. "I was told you might be able to help with this." Elias removed the loop from his eye and opened the case. He looked at the Patek Philippe without a flicker of surprise. He picked it up gently, his calloused fingers surprisingly delicate against the polished steel. He turned it over, examining the exhibition back. For a full minute he said nothing, simply observing the mechanism. "It's a perpetual calendar chronograph," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "A beautiful movement, but complicated. What seems to be the issue?" "It stops," Naima said simply, randomly. The best jewelers in the city couldn't find the problem. He nodded slowly, still looking at the watch, not at her. The best jewelers are often salesmen. They know the price, not the heart. He placed the watch back on the velvet lining. I'll need to keep it for a few days. To observe it. There's a microfracture in the mainspring barrel, I think. Or a problem with the escapement lubrication. It's subtle. Naima was taken aback. No one had given her such a precise, immediate diagnosis. You can tell that just by looking at it? He finally met her gaze. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. I've been doing this a long time. Just then, the curtain behind the counter rustled and a little girl emerged. It was Amara, fresh from school, her backpack bouncing. Her hair was in two neat buns, and she had a smudge of purple marker on her cheek. She stopped short when she saw Naima, her bright eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, who's the shiny lady?" Amara asked, her voice clear as a bell. Elias's expression softened instantly, the focused craftsman melting away to reveal the loving father. "Amara, this is a customer. Her name is—" He looked at Naima, realizing he hadn't asked. "Naima," she supplied, a genuine smile breaking through her composed facade for the first time that day. The child's blunt honesty was refreshing. "This is Naima," Elias said. "Naima, this is my daughter, Amara." Amara tiptoed forward and peered at Naima's suit. "It's not shiny, it's soft shiny." She looked up at Naima. "Are you a queen?" Naima laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and unpracticed. "No, sweetheart, I'm not a queen." "Oh." Amara seemed to consider this. "Okay." She then turned her attention to the watch on the counter. "Is your watch sleepy too? Daddy wakes up all the sleepy watches." "Yes," Naima found herself saying. "It's very sleepy." Elias wrote out a claim ticket on a small, old-fashioned paper pad. "I'll call you in 3 days," he said, his tone once again professional. But the brief exchange with his daughter had changed the energy in the room. It was no longer just a shop. It was a home. Naima took the ticket. As she turned to leave, Amara held up a piece of paper. It was one of her drawings. A blue butterfly with huge swirly wings. "This is for you," she said, "so your watch won't be lonely while it's sleeping here." Naima stared at the drawing. No one had given her an unconditional gift in years. Everything in her life was a transaction. This was just kindness. She took the piece of paper, her fingers brushing Amara's. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. She walked out of the shop, the little bell jingling behind her, the drawing of the butterfly clutched in her hand. Back in the sterile luxury of her chauffeured car, she looked at the crayon drawing. It was imperfect, vibrant, and more valuable to her in that moment than the $250,000 watch she had just left behind. True to his word, Elias called 3 days later. "It's ready," he said, his voice calm and steady over the phone. It was the lubrication, as I suspected. It had become viscous at a specific temperature, creating just enough friction to stop the balance wheel. "I've cleaned and reapplied it." Naima found herself making an excuse to leave a board meeting early. The thought of returning to the quiet, ticking world of the watch shop was an irresistible pull. When she arrived, Elias was polishing the crystal of her watch with a soft cloth. It looked brighter, more alive than she had ever seen it. He handed it to her, and she strapped it to her wrist. The second hand was sweeping in a smooth, perfect circle. "What do I owe you?" she asked, pulling her wallet from her purse. Elias shook his head. "No charge." Naima frowned. "That's not possible. Your time, your expertise, it's valuable." "It was a 5-minute fix," he said, deflecting the praise. "And a professional courtesy. It was a pleasure to work on a movement of that quality." He paused. "Besides, Amara was very insistent that we not charge the butterfly lady." Naima smiled. She had taped the drawing to the monitor in her office, a splash of chaotic blue in a world of black and white data. She found herself lingering, unwilling to complete the transaction and leave. "You have an amazing daughter." "She's the best part of me," he said simply, his gaze drifting to the curtained doorway. Over the next few weeks, Naima found other reasons to visit the shop. She brought in an old clock from her grandfather, a vintage Cartier from her collection that needed a new strap. Each visit was a small island of peace in her turbulent week. She learned more about Elias in quiet fragments. He had once designed engines for a boutique car manufacturer, but had given it up when his then-wife's career took off. He never spoke of Monique with bitterness, only a kind of weary sadness. The real draw, she had to admit, was Amara. The little girl had adopted Naima as a friend. She would show Naima her latest drawings, ask her 1,000 breathless, run-on questions about her day. Did you go in an elevator? And did it go a stand? Did you press the buttons and ask its way up Thesky? And once, when Naima arrived looking particularly stressed, Amara had taken her hand. You look like you need a hug from Peanut, she'd said solemnly, before pressing the stuffed elephant into Naima's arms. Naima had almost cried right there in the middle of the shop. One afternoon she arrived to find Elias eating lunch at his workbench, a simple meal of rice and beans in a reusable container. He saw her and, without a word, reached into his bag and pulled out another container and a fork. My mother always said to pack enough for a guest, even if you're not expecting one. Naima, who usually ate a $50 salad at her desk without tasting it, found herself sitting on a stool, eating warm, home-cooked food. It was the most delicious thing she'd had in years. They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the ticking of the clocks and the soft scrape of forks against plastic. It was during one of these quiet visits that her eyes fell upon the watch in the corner of his bench, the one with the cracked crystal and the dead hands. "What about that one?" she asked. "Is it a customer's?" Elias picked it up, his expression unreadable. "No, this was my father's." "Are you going to fix it?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know if I can, and I don't know if I should. It's complicated." He told her about his father, a man who worked 3 jobs and believed in the simple dignity of a task well done. He spoke of his marriage, of pouring his own dreams into a vessel that had ultimately shattered and sunk. He spoke of the shame of starting over, the fear that he wouldn't be enough for Amara. He never raised his voice, never indulged in self-pity. His pain was a quiet, deep river. Naima listened, her own walls beginning to crumble. She found herself telling him about the crushing weight of expectation, about the profound loneliness of the penthouse, about her fear that if she ever stopped achieving, she would simply cease to exist in the eyes of those who claimed to love her. It was a shared wound, a quiet confession in a room full of ticking clocks, 2 people from different worlds, discovering they spoke the same language of loss. He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her cool skin. "I see you, Naima," he whispered. It was the simplest sentence, but it struck her with the force of a revelation. He didn't see the CEO. He didn't see the power or the wealth. He just saw her. Her gaze fell back to his father's watch, which he had placed on the workbench between them. Something about the design, the shape of the lugs, the specific typeface of the dormant numerals, pricked at her memory. She had spent years immersed in the world of luxury goods, developing an eye for rare and beautiful things. "Elias," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "May I see that again?" He handed it to her. She turned it over and over in her hands. The metal was heavy, dense. There was no maker's name on the dial, a sign of either extreme modesty or extreme arrogance. With a practiced movement, she used her fingernail to gently pry open the case back. Her breath hitched. Inside, beneath the silent, intricate tangle of gears and springs, was a tiny, almost invisible engraving, a name she recognized instantly. It was the signature of a legendary, reclusive watchmaker who had produced only a handful of pieces in his lifetime, each one a bespoke masterpiece for royalty and titans of a bygone era. "Elias," she said, her eyes wide as she looked up at him, "this isn't just a watch. Do you have any idea what this is?" Elias looked at the watch, then back at her, a confused frown on his face. "It was my father's. He said he got it from an old man whose car he fixed. The man couldn't pay, so he gave him the watch instead." Naima's mind was racing, connecting the dots. The reclusive watchmaker had famously disappeared from public life and was rumored to have spent his last years living simply, anonymously. "This watch," she said, her voice trembling slightly with the magnitude of the discovery, "is one of the rarest timepieces in the world. It's called the Eternus. There are only 3 known to exist. The other 2 are in private vaults. Elias, this is worth millions." He stared at her, then at the dull piece of metal in her hand, the object that had been a symbol of his failure and loss. He started to laugh. It was a low, incredulous sound that slowly built into a full, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. Millions. The word was absurd, meaningless. He looked at Naima, her luminous dark skin glowing in the soft light of the workshop, and at the curtain leading to the back where his daughter was humming, and he knew that the most valuable things in his life couldn't be counted. But still, the irony was so thick he could taste it. Monique had thrown away a fortune. The news, however, was a complication. It was a key that could unlock 1,000 doors, but it also threatened to let the cold, transactional world they had both escaped from come rushing back in. The illusion of their quiet, separate world was shattered a week later. Naima had taken to picking Amara up from her preschool on days when her schedule allowed, a small act of domesticity that brought her an inordinate amount of joy. She had just buckled a chattering Amara into the back of her sleek black sedan when another car, a pearl-white Range Rover, pulled up aggressively beside them. The window rolled down. It was Monique. She was dressed in designer athletic wear, her face a mask of perfectly applied makeup and disdain. Her eyes swept over Naima, then the car, a flicker of jealous evaluation in her gaze. She ignored Amara completely. "Elias," she said, her voice like ice chips, "I should have known you'd find another wealthy woman to leech off of. It's your only real skill, isn't it?" Elias, who had been walking Naima and Amara to the car, stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Naima as if to shield her. His face was a calm, unreadable mask, but Naima could see the tension in his shoulders. "Monique," he said, his voice low and even, "this isn't the time or the place." "Oh, I think it is," she sneered. "I hear you've been telling people some fantasy about that piece of junk your father gave you. You're delusional. I'm starting to think you're not a fit environment for my daughter." The threat hung in the air, ugly and sharp. The word "my" was a deliberate dagger. Naima felt a cold fury rise within her, but Elias simply held up a hand, a silent signal for her to stay put. He knew Amara was listening from the car, and his first priority, always, was to protect her from this poison. "Amara is happy, she is loved. That's all that matters," he said, his voice unwavering. "Now I suggest you leave." Monique laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "We'll see what the courts have to say about a broke watchmaker living in a slum with a child. When I'm done, you won't even have that broken watch to cry over." She sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust and bitterness. The silence that followed was heavy. Elias's shoulders sagged for just a moment, the weight of the threat settling on him. He had so little, and she was threatening to take the one thing that gave his life meaning. Naima got out of the car. She walked over to him and without a word took his hand. His fingers were cold. "She can't do that, Elias," Naima said fiercely. "She has no grounds." "People like Monique don't need grounds," he said, his voice rough with a pain he rarely showed. "They just need money and malice. She can drag me through the mud for years. She can hurt Amara." Naima's heart ached for him. She saw the fear behind his quiet strength. This was the external threat, the cold reality of the world, trying to break the fragile, beautiful thing they were building. She saw the path forward with absolute clarity. Monique's power came from a world of status, money, and public perception. Naima knew that world better than anyone, and she was about to turn its rules against her. "Go home, Elias," she said, her voice now calm and full of a steely resolve he hadn't heard before. "Take care of your daughter. Let me handle this." He looked at her, a question in his eyes. He saw not the CEO, but the woman. A woman who was choosing to stand with him, to fight for him. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his trust in her. For the first time, he was letting someone else be strong for him. Naima did not confront Monique directly. That would be playing her petty game? Instead, she went to her own battlefield, the boardroom. 2 days later, she convened an emergency meeting of the philanthropic board of her company's foundation. The announcement was for a new flagship initiative. She stood before the predominantly black executive board, a group of men and women she had mentored and championed. She was in her element, poised and powerful. But today her words carried a different weight, a personal passion that was undeniable. "For too long," she began, her voice ringing with conviction, "we have defined value by market caps and profit margins. We have celebrated disruption while allowing tradition to wither. We have honored the unicorn startup, but forgotten the master craftsman." She clicked to a new slide. It was a picture of Elias's hands, working at his bench, a photo she had taken discreetly on her phone one afternoon. In this city, in neighborhoods that are the bedrock of our culture, there are artists, men and women who possess generations of skill, who are keepers of a dying flame, people who create and repair and preserve value that is not disposable. We, as a company and as a community, have a duty to support them. She laid out her proposal. The Legacy Artisans Grant, a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to providing capital, business support, and workshop spaces for master craftspeople in historically underserved communities. "And I am proud to announce the first recipient," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. Another slide appeared. It was a picture of the front of the Horologist's Corner, its humble sign rendered noble and proud. "Mr. Elias Vance, a horologist of unparalleled skill, will receive a grant to expand his workshop and establish an apprenticeship program to train the next generation of watchmakers in this city." The room erupted in applause. It was a brilliant move, strategic, philanthropic, and deeply personal. It was a public and irreversible declaration of her values and of her allegiance. She wasn't just helping a friend. She was investing in a community, in a philosophy, in a different way of life. She was using her immense power not to crush an enemy, but to build something beautiful. The news was in the business journals by afternoon. Naima, the tech visionary, was championing old-world craft. In one elegant public act, she had reframed Elias's narrative. He was no longer a broke watchmaker in a slum. He was a celebrated artisan, a cultural treasure, the recipient of a prestigious grant. Monique's threats had been rendered utterly powerless, turned to ash by the sheer, overwhelming force of Naima's conviction. She had not stooped to Monique's level. She had simply risen so high that Monique's pettiness could no longer reach them. The weeks after the announcement were a blur of beautiful, constructive chaos. The grant allowed Elias to purchase the entire building his small shop was in. Architects and designers, hired by Naima's foundation, worked with him to transform the space. The new workshop was a masterpiece of glass and warm wood, sunlight streaming in through huge restored windows. It was a perfect blend of modern functionality and old-world soul. There was a gallery space in the front to showcase the work of other local artisans and a state-of-the-art workshop in the back, with 6 new benches for the apprentices he would soon take on. But the heart of the new space was a quiet corner, almost identical to his old setup, with his original wooden bench, his worn tools, and the faint, familiar smell of cleaning oil. It was his anchor. Naima was there constantly, not as a CEO overseeing a project, but as a partner. She would arrive after her own long days, trade her heels for flats, and help him unpack boxes or arrange displays. They found their rhythm not in grand romantic gestures, but in the shared, quiet work of building something together. They would often work late into the evening, sharing a takeout dinner on the polished concrete floor, their conversation easy and unhurried. Amara was in heaven. She had her own small table and chair in a sunny corner, a dedicated art station where she would create her masterpieces while her father worked. She called the new building the Sunny Clock House. She had fully accepted Naima's presence in their lives, treating it as the most natural thing in the world. One evening, as the sun set, casting long golden rays across the floor, Amara came over to where Naima and Elias were sitting together on a newly installed window seat, looking out at the street. She held up a new drawing. This one was different. It wasn't a butterfly or a smiling sun. It was 3 stick figures. They stood in front of a building with a big clock on it. One figure was a tall man with short, coily hair drawn in brown crayon. One was a little girl in a yellow dress with brown skin and beaded braids that stuck out joyfully. And standing between them, holding both their hands, was a woman. She had brown skin, and her hair was drawn in a big, beautiful bun. "It's us," Amara said, pointing with a small finger. "It's our family at the Sunny Clock House." Naima's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at the simple drawing, at the 3 brown-skinned figures united by crayon hands, and felt a sense of belonging so profound it almost buckled her. This was family. Not the one you were born into, with its conditions and expectations, but the one you chose. The one that chose you. Elias wrapped his arm around her, his touch warm and sure. He looked at the drawing, then at Naima, his eyes full of a love that needed no words. He had seen her, and she had seen him, and a little girl with a box of crayons had drawn their future, 6 months later. The workshop was thriving, a hub of creativity and community. The apprentices, 3 bright-eyed young people from the neighborhood, revered Elias. Naima had found a new balance in her life. She still ran her company with formidable skill, but she no longer lived in the glass tower. She had sold the penthouse and moved into a beautiful brownstone a few blocks from the workshop. It had a small garden in the back. The famous watch, the Eternus, had been sold through a private, discreet auction handled by Naima's connections. The sum was staggering, more money than Elias could have ever imagined. It was enough to secure Amara's future 100 times over. It was enough to fund the apprenticeship program for a decade. But Elias had kept one small piece of it, the original, intricately engraved case back. A reminder of his father and of the journey that had brought him here. One clear, crisp autumn evening, he and Naima were on the rooftop of the workshop building, looking up at the stars. Amara was having a sleepover at a friend's house, and the quiet felt intimate and special. "Do you ever miss it?" Naima asked softly. "The old life?" Elias thought for a moment. He thought of the cold, silent mansion, of the constant, gnawing feeling of being a supporting character in his own story. He shook his head. "I wasn't living. I was just keeping time for someone else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. It was not the old, worn box that had held his father's watch. This one was new. He opened it. Inside, nestled on black satin, was a watch. It was a lady's timepiece, elegant and understated. The case was a warm rose gold, the dial a deep, luminous blue, like the twilight sky above them. It was a watch no one had ever seen before because he had made it himself. Every gear, every screw, every polished surface had been crafted by his own hands over the last few months. "It's not a Patek Philippe," he said, his voice a low whisper. "It doesn't have a perpetual calendar, but it has a very strong heart, and it will never stop." He turned it over. On the back, where a maker's signature would normally be, he had engraved a single, tiny image, a blue butterfly. Naima was speechless. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. This was not a transaction. This was a testament. It was a promise made of steel and gold and time itself. He took the watch from the box and gently fastened it around her wrist. It fit perfectly. He didn't say, "Will you marry me?" He didn't need to. The watch said it all. It said, "Our time starts now." She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered. "Always, yes." The next day, when Amara came home, she saw the new watch on Naima's wrist. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Naima, then at her father, her little face a picture of dawning comprehension and hope. "Does that mean you're staying forever?" she asked, her voice small and full of a child's devastating sincerity. Naima knelt down so she was at eye level with the little girl who had first broken through her armor with a simple drawing. She took Amara's small hands in her own. "Yes, sweet pea," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means I'm staying forever." Love, the narrator might say, is a lot like a master timepiece. It isn't about grand, flashy complications. It's about a steady, reliable heart. It's about two different movements finding a way to tick in perfect harmony. Elias and Naima had come from worlds that measured value in dollars and status, but they had found true worth in the quiet moments, in a shared meal, a child's drawing, a silent understanding. They had learned that the most precious thing you can ever be given is not a fortune, but a second chance. And the most valuable thing you can ever own is not time itself, but the person you choose to spend it with. They had built a new life not on the ruins of the past, but with the best parts of it, creating a family that was stronger and more beautiful than any priceless heirloom. A family built not by accident of birth, but by deliberate, courageous, and gentle choice.